Can you tell me the saga of the accusations against Neri?
So I did not actually surface the plagiarism allegations against President Gay that were surfaced by, Aaron and maybe Christopher Rufo as well, or maybe Chris helped promote what Aaron and some anonymous person identified. But it was a point in time where the board had said we're 100% behind her and unanimously. And I really felt she had to go. So it didn't bother me at all that they had identified problems with her work. So I reposted those posts. And then when she ultimately resigned and she got a $900,000 a year professorship continuing at Harvard, I said, look, in light of her limited academic record and these plagiarism allegations, she had to go. I knew when I did so, I assumed I was actually a bit paranoid about that thesis I had written. I only had one academic work, but I hadn't checked it for plagiarism. And I thought, that's gonna happen. Actually, I had someone. I did not have a copy on hand, so I got a copy of my thesis, and I remember writing it. Harvard at the time was pretty. They kind of gave you a lecture about making sure you have all your footnotes and quotation marks. I learned later that apparently they had a copy of my thesis at the New York Public Library, and a member of the media told me he was there online with a dozen other members of the media, all trying to get a copy of my thesis to run it through some AI. They had to first do optical character recognition to convert the paper document into digital. But fortunately, through a miracle, I didn't have an issue. I didn't think about Neri, of course, who has 130 academic works. And so we were just at the end of a vacation for Christmas break. And I was early in the morning for vacation time, and all of a sudden I hear my phone ringing in the other room, or vibrating in the other room multiple times. I'm like, I pick up the phone, and it's our communication guy, Fran McGill, and he's like, Bill, Business Insider has apparently identified a number of instances of plagiarism in Neri's dissertation. Let me send you this email. He sent me the email, and they had identified 4 paragraphs in her 330-page dissertation where she had cited the author, but she had used the vast majority of the words in those paragraphs were from the author, and she should have used quotation marks. And then there was one case where she paraphrased correctly an author, but did not footnote that it was from his work. And so we were presented with this and told they're going to publish in a few hours. And we're like, well, can we get to the next day? We're just about to head home. And they're like, no, we're publishing by noon. We need an answer by noon. And so we downloaded the copy of her thesis on the slow internet. And, Neri checked it out and she said, you know what, looks like they're right. And I said, look, you should just admit your mistake. And she wrote a very simple, gracious, yes, I should have used quotation marks. And on the author I failed to cite, she pointed out that she cited them 80 other times and wrote a several paragraph section of her thesis acknowledging, his work. And none of these were important parts of her thesis, but she acknowledged her mistake. And she said, apologize for my mistake. And I apologize to the author who I failed to cite. And I stand on the shoulders of, all the people who came before me and looking to advance work. And we sort of thought it was over. We head home. In flight on the way home, although we didn't realize this till we got back the following day, Business Insider published another article. And it said, Neri Oxman admits to plagiarism. Plagiarism, of course, is academic fraud. And this thing goes crazy viral. Oh, the title is Bill Ackman's wife, celebrity academic Neri Oxman. And they use the term celebrity because there are limits to what legitimate media can go after. But, celebrities, there's a lot more leeway in the media and what they can say. So that's why they call her a celebrity. First time ever she'd been called a celebrity. And they basically, she's admitting to academic fraud. And then they said, and then the next day at 5:19 p.m., I remember the timeline pretty well, an email was sent to Fran McGill saying, we've identified, 24 other instances of plagiarism in her work. 15 of which are Wikipedia entries where she copied definitions. And the others were mostly software, hardware manuals for various devices or software she used in her work, most of which were in footnotes where she described a nozzle for a 3D printer or something like this. And they said, we're publishing, tonight. The email they sent to us was 6,900 words. It was 12 pages. It was practically indecipherable. You couldn't even read it in an hour. And we didn't have some of the documents they were referring to. And I'm like, Neri, you know what I'm going to do? I think it will be useful to provide context here. I'm going to do a review of every MIT professor's dissertations, every published paper. AI has enabled this. And so I put out a tweet basically saying that. And we're doing a test run now because we have to get it right. And I think it'll be a useful exercise. Provide some context, if you will. And then this thing goes crazy viral. And Neri is a pretty sensitive person, pretty emotional person, and someone who's a perfectionist. And having everyone in the world thinking you committed academic fraud is a pretty damning thing. Now, they did say they did a thorough review of all of her work, and this is what they found. I'm like, sweetheart, that's remarkable. I did 130 works, 73 of which were peer-reviewed, blah, 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 and she's published in Nature Science and all these different publications. It's a pretty good batting average. But, they can't, this is wrong, right? This is not academic fraud, okay? These are inadvertent mistakes. And the Wikipedia entries, Neri actually used Wikipedia as a dictionary. This is the early days of Wikipedia. And they also referred to the MIT handbook, which has a whole section on plagiarism, academic handbook. And if you read it, which I ultimately did, they make clear a few things. Number one, there's plagiarism, academic fraud, and there's what they call inadvertent plagiarism, which is clerical errors where you make a mistake, and it depends on intent. And there's a link that you can go to, which is a section on if you get investigated at MIT, what happens, what's the procedure, what's the initial stage, what's the investigative stage, what's the procedure if they identify it. And they make very clear that academic fraud is, and they list plagiarism, research theft, a few other things, but it does not include honest errors. Honest errors are not plagiarism under MIT's own policies. And in the handbook, they also have a big section on what they call common knowledge. And common knowledge depends on who you're writing your thesis for. And so if it's a fact that is known by your audience, you're not required to quote or cite. And so all those Wikipedia entries were for things like sustainable design, computer-aided design. She just took a definition from Wikipedia, common knowledge to her readers, no obligation under the handbook, totally exempt. On the using the same words, she referred to some kind of 3D printer. She was the Stratasys 3D printer, and she quoted from the manual right away. Stratasys is a company she consulted for. They're very, you don't need to, that's not something, you're not stealing their ideas. You're describing a nozzle for a device you use in your work in a footnote. That's not a theft of idea, right? And so I'm like, this is crazy. And so this has got to stop. And so I reach out to a guy I knew was on the board of Business Insider, the chairman, and his name is going to come public shortly. I committed at that time to keep his name confidential. It's now surfaced publicly in the press.
Can I just pause real
Sure.
quick here? Just to, I don't know, there's a lot of things I want to say, but you made it pretty clear. But just as a member of the community, there's also like a common sense test. I think you're more precisely like legal and looking at,
Sure.
But there's just like a bullshit test, and like nothing that Neri did is plagiarism in the bad meaning of the word. Plagiarism right now is becoming another ism like racism or so on, using as an attack word. I don't care what the meaning of it is, but there's the bad academic fraud, like theft.
Yes.
Theft of an idea. And maybe you can say a lot of definitions and this kind of stuff, but then there's just a basic bullshit test where everyone knows this is a thief and this is definitely not a thief. And there's nothing about anything that Neri did, anything in her thesis or in her life. Everyone that knows her, she's a rock star, right? I just want to make it clear, it really hurt me that the internet, whatever is happening, could go after a great scientist because I love science and I love celebrating great scientists. And it's just really messed up that whatever the machine, and we can talk about Business Insight or whatever, social media, mass hysteria, whatever is happening, like we need the great scientists of the world because that's like the future depends on them. And so we need to celebrate them and protect them and let them flourish and let them do their thing and like keep them out of this whatever shitstorm that we're doing
Yes.
to get clicks and advertisements and drama and all this kind. We need to protect them. So I just want to say there's nobody I know, and I'm a million friends that are scientists, world-class scientists, Nobel Prize winners. They all love Neri. They all respect Neri. She did zero wrong. I just want to, and then the rest of the conversation we can have about how broken journalism is and so on. But like, I just want to say that there's nothing that Neri did wrong. It's not a gray area or so on. I also personally don't love that Claudine Gay is a discussion about plagiarism because it distracts from the fundamentals that is broken. It becomes like some weird technical discussion. But in case of Neri, did nothing wrong. Great scientist, great engineer at MIT and beyond. She's doing the cool thing now. So anyway.
Could not have said it better myself. Now, obviously, I'm focused on the technical part.
Right, because you want to be,
yes.
be precise here.
Well, it's not even that. I mean, yes, I have said that we're going to sue Business Insider. And in 35 years of my career of someone who has not every article has been a favorable one, not every article has been an accurate one. I've never threatened to sue the media, and I've never sued the media. But this is so egregious. It's not just that she did nothing wrong, but they accused her of academic fraud. They did it knowing they make reference to MIT's own handbook. So they had to read all the same stuff that I read in the handbook. They did that work. Then after I, escalated this thing to the, Henry Blodgett, the chairman of Business Insider, to the CEO of Axel Springer, I even reached out to Henry Kravis at a certain point in time, one of the controlling shareholders of the company through KKR, laying out the factual errors in the article. Business Insider went public after they said Neri committed academic fraud and plagiarism and said we didn't challenge any. The facts remain undisputed in the article. So it's basically Neri committed plagiarism. That's story one. Neri admits to plagiarism. She admits to plagiarism. She admitted to making a few clerical errors. That's the only thing she admitted to. And she graciously apologized. So they said, Neri admits to plagiarism, apologizes for plagiarism. That's incredibly damning. And by the way, we're doing an investigation because we're concerned that there might have been inappropriate process. But the facts of the story have not been disputed by Neri, Oxman, or Bill Ackman. And that was totally false. I had done it privately. I'd done it publicly on Twitter, on X. I laid out, I have a whole text stream, a WhatsApp stream with the CEO of the company. And they doubled down, and they doubled down again. And so I don't sue people lightly. And stay tuned.
So you're, at least for now, moving forward with...
It's a certainty we're moving forward. There's a step we can take prior to suing them, where we basically send them a letter demanding they make a series of corrections. That if they don't make those corrections, the next step is litigation. I hope we can avoid the next step. And I'm just making sure that when we present the demand to Business Insider and ultimately to Axel Springer, that it's incredibly clear how they defamed her, the factual mistakes in her stories, and what they need to do to fix it. And if we can fix it there, we can move on from this episode and hopefully avoid litigation. So that's where we are.
I don't know. You're smarter than me. There's technical stuff. There's legal stuff. There's journalistic stuff. But just fuck you, Business Insider, for doing this. I don't know much in this world, but journalists aren't supposed to do that.
Now, look, we're going to surface all of this stuff publicly, ultimately. The email was not to Neri saying there was plagiarism in her work. The email came from a reporter named Catherine Long. And the headline was, "Your wife committed plagiarism. Shouldn't she be fired from MIT?" just like you caused Claudine Gay to be fired from Harvard.
Yeah.
It was a political agenda. She doesn't like me, okay? And she was trying to hurt me, and they couldn't find plagiarism in my thesis. And, being the subject of being a short seller, the Herbalife battle went on for years. They tried to do everything to destroy my reputation. So they'd already gone through my trash. They'd already done all that work. So anything they could possibly find, and I've always lived a very clean life, okay, thankfully. And if you're going to be an activist short seller, you better, because they're going to find out dirt on you if it exists. And so they were like, how can we really hurt Bill? And by the way, Neri had left MIT years earlier.
Yes.
When the reporter found out she was no longer a member of the MIT faculty, they were enraged. They didn't believe us. They made us prove to us she's no longer on the MIT faculty because they wanted to get her fired. And by the way, malice is one of the, important factors in determining whether defamation's taken place. And this was a malice-driven. This was not about news. And the unfortunate thing about journalism is Business Insider made a fortune from this. This story was published and republished by thousands of media organizations around the world. It was the number one trending thing on Twitter for like 2 days. Every newspaper, it was on the front page of every Israeli newspaper. It was on the front page of the Financial Times. Okay, so and she's building a business. Mm-hmm. And, if you're CEO of a science company and you committed academic fraud, that's incredibly damaging. But I ultimately convinced her that this was good. I said, sweetheart, you're amazing. You're incredible. You're incredibly talented, but you're mostly known in the design world. Now, everyone in the universe, okay, has heard of Neri Oxman. Okay. We're going to get this thing cleared up. You're going to be doing an event in 6 months where you're going to tell the world, you're going to go out of stealth mode. You can tell the world about all the incredible things that you're building and you're designing and you're creating. And it's going to be like the iPhone launch because everyone's going to be paying attention and they're going to want to see your work. And, that's how I try to cheer up, but I think it's true.
It is true, but and you're doing your job as a good partner, seeing the silver lining of all this. How is, just from observing her, how did she, stay strong through all of this psychologically? Because at least I know she's pushing ahead with the work.
Oh, she's full speed ahead in her work. She's built an amazing team. She's hired 30 scientists, roboticists, people who, biologists, plant specialists, material scientists, engineers, really incredible crew. She's built this 36,000 square foot lab in New York City. That's a one of a kind. It's still, they're working out of it. It's still under construction while they're working out of it. And so she's going to do amazing things. But, as I said, she's an extremely sensitive person. She's a perfectionist. Okay. Imagine thinking that the entire world thinks you committed academic fraud. And so that was very hard for her. She's a very positive person, but I saw her in, I would say, her darkest emotional period, for sure. She's doing much better now. But you can kill someone. You can kill someone by destroying their reputation. People commit suicide. People go into these deep, dark depression.
Well, my worry primarily when I saw what Business Insider was doing is that they might dim the light of a truly special scientist and creator.
It's not going to happen.
But I also worry about others like Neri, young Neris, that this sends a signal to that might scare them. And, journalism shouldn't scare aspiring young scientists.
The problem is the defamation law in the US is so favorable to the publisher, to the media, and so unfavorable to the victim. And the incentives are all wrong. When you went from a paper version of journalism to digital, and you could track how many people click, and it's a medium that advertising drives the economics. And if you can show an advertiser more clicks, mm-hmm. you can make more money. Right? So a journalist is incentivized to write a story that will generate more clicks. How do you write a story that will generate more clicks? You get a billionaire guy, okay, and then you go after his wife and you make a sensationalist story and you give them no time to respond, right? Look at the timing here. On the first story, they gave us 3 hours. On the second one, the following day, 5:19 p.m., the email comes in, not to Neri, not to her firm, but to my communications person, who tracks us down by 5:30, 10 minutes later. And they published their story 92 minutes after, and they sent us, we're going to surface all these documents in our demand. Read the email they sent, whether you could even decipher it. There was no, and by the way, there's a reason why academic institutions, when a professor is accused of plagiarism, why they have these very careful processes with multiple stages, and they can take a year or more, because it depends on intent. Was this intentional? In order to be a crime, an academic crime, you got to prove that they intentionally stole. Look, in some cases it's obvious, in some cases it's very subtle, and they take this stuff super seriously. But they basically accused Neri of academic crime, and then 92 minutes later, they said she committed an academic crime, and that should be a crime, and that should be punishable with litigation, and there should be a real cost, and we're going to make sure there's a real cost, reputationally and otherwise, to Business Insider and to Axel Springer, because ultimately you got to look to the controlling owner. They're responsible.
I'll just say that you, in this regard, are inspiring to me for facing basically an institution that whole purpose is to write articles. So you're like going into the fire.
My kids' school, the epithet for the school, or the saying, is "Go forth unafraid." I think it's a good way to live. And again, words can't harm me. The power of X, and we do owe Elon enormous thanks for this, is now. So, for example, the Washington Post wrote a story about me a couple of days ago, and I didn't think the story was a fair story. So, within a few hours of the story being written, I'm able to put out a response to the story and send it to 1,200,000 people, and it gets read and reread. I haven't checked, but probably 5 million people saw my response. Now, those are the people on X. It's not everyone in the world. There's a disconnection between the X world and the offline world. But reputation in my business is basically all you have. And as they say, you can take a lifetime to build a reputation and take 5 minutes to have it disappear. And the media plays a very important role, and they can destroy people. At least we now have some ability to fight back. We have a platform we can surface our views. The typical old days are they write an incredibly damning article and you point out factual errors, and then like 2 months later they bury a little correction on page whatever. By then the person was fired, or their life is destroyed, or the reputation's damaged. I was with Warren Buffett talking about media, and it's something a business he really loves. And he says, "You know what, Bill?" He said, a thief with a dagger. The only person who can cause you more harm than a thief with a dagger is a journalist with a pen. And those were very powerful words.